It was a quiet morning in Ouagadougou. The streets were still wet from the night rain. Soldiers lined the boulevard, their boots clicking in rhythm as if the entire nation was holding its breath. Then he appeared, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. No fanfare, no prepared crowd, no foreign journalists, just a man in uniform speaking to his people and to the world. Camarades, bonjour. He began, his tone calm yet heavy with purpose. What followed wasn't a political update. It was a revelation. In less than 20 minutes, Traoré dismantled 3 invisible empires: corruption, complacency, and colonial communication. He called out the fake intermediaries who pretend to sell access to the presidency. He unveiled a new national contribution platform, Faso Mbo, where every citizen from farmer to diaspora could directly build their own region. And then, with the calm of a soldier and the clarity of a philosopher, he exposed something far darker. For decades, our ministries have been paying the very media that destroy our image. Those words sent shockwaves through the continent. Because he wasn't just talking about Burkina Faso, he was talking about Africa's soul. About how empires no longer conquer through guns, but through words, narratives, and lies that Africans unknowingly fund themselves. So tonight, as you watch this, ask yourself, who really owns the truth you read every morning? How many times have the victims financed their own silence? Because this speech, this moment, wasn't just about a president. It was about a continent reclaiming the right to speak for itself. Please share this video if you believe Africa deserves to tell its own story. And subscribe if you believe the truth is worth more than the headlines. Before he spoke of media or revolution, Ibrahim Traoré began with something more ordinary but far more dangerous: corruption disguised as routine. He described it not as a crime, but as a disease that had infected the body of the nation for generations. Everywhere he looked, there were people, some in suits, some in military uniform, pretending to represent the presidency, claiming they could arrange contracts or schedule meetings for a fee. These people travel across the country, he said, tricking investors, deceiving citizens, and selling fake access to power. They tell businessmen that to win a public contract, they must pay. They tell villagers that to see their president, they must pay. His tone was not angry, it was disappointed. Because these practices, he explained, were not born yesterday. They were the lingering habits of a political culture inherited from the colonial era, the belief that nothing moves without money, that no door opens without a bribe. As he spoke, you could almost picture it, the office corridors, where whispers replaced law, where paper files never moved, unless an envelope accompanied them. It was the kind of corruption that no court could see because it lived in people's expectations. But Traoré's message was clear and uncompromising. We are in a revolution. These things no longer exist in Burkina Faso. He wasn't simply banning bribery. He was attacking a mindset. He told citizens, if you want a government contract, follow the rules, submit your work, and let merit decide. If you want to meet a public official, go through the right channels, the advisory offices, the major projects bureau, the protocol service. You owe no one a franc, he said. The room fell silent, because everyone knew that for years this was how things worked. Traoré called out the hidden cost, endless investigations, wasted police hours, and public trust eroded by those pretending to act in the name of the state. And for the first time in decades, the nation heard a leader say out loud that the state itself had been held hostage by intermediaries. What made this moment historic was not just his honesty, but his timing. He delivered this message as Burkina Faso entered the final quarter of 2025, a period marked by war on multiple fronts, economic strain, and foreign pressure. Yet, instead of asking for sympathy or aid, he asked for integrity. In a world where politicians usually hide corruption under layers of bureaucracy, Traoré did the opposite. He named it, shamed it, and warned every citizen to stop feeding it. His statement wasn't a threat. It was an invitation to awakening. No one will build our country for us. It begins with us. That single sentence echoed across social media, radio stations, and church gatherings. It became a quiet anthem for a weary people, the sense that perhaps for the first time leadership and honesty could belong in the same sentence. But beneath that calm determination was a deeper challenge, not only to those who steal, but to those who stay silent. Because corruption survives not by power, but by habit, by the belief that this is how Africa works. By declaring that those days were over, Traoré wasn't just changing policy. He was breaking a psychological chain. And in that moment, many across Africa began to realize if Burkina Faso can cleanse its institutions, maybe the rest of the continent can too. The first battle in Traoré's war for truth had begun not with guns but with words, and this time the target was not an enemy army. It was the ghost of Africa's old self. After exposing corruption's invisible roots, Ibrahim Traoré shifted his tone. It softened, but only slightly. The soldier became a builder. He began speaking about Faso Mbo, a name that in the local languages carries the soul of a promise to rebuild the nation with our own hands. The story of Faso Mbo began as a simple initiative, volunteers cleaning towns, repairing roads, planting trees. But soon it became a symbol of something much larger, the rebirth of civic pride. When Traoré mentioned it, the crowd stirred. Everyone knew the program had already spread across villages, military barracks, and schools. Yet he pointed out a problem that no one dared to say aloud. Many wanted to contribute, especially Burkina Faso living abroad, but they couldn't. Faso Mbo so far only accepted material donations, cement, tools, fuel. Many of our brothers and sisters in the diaspora and even our friends abroad, he said, wanted to join, but they found it difficult. So we decided to create a solution simple, transparent, and open to all. He announced that the Burkina Faso Treasury had finished building a new system, one account per region, so anyone anywhere could contribute directly to the development of their homeland. The platform would be known as Faso Zeka, a digital mirror of collective patriotism. And then came the sentence that drew thunderous applause across the room. Each month, the list of every contributor, their name, and the amount will be printed and made public. No secrecy, no bureaucracy, no stolen funds, just transparency. For a continent long scarred by hidden budgets and ghost projects, this was revolutionary. A government declaring in front of the world that it would publish where every coin goes. To older Burkina Faso, it felt like the days of Thomas Sankara had returned, when dignity and simplicity guided the nation's heartbeat. To the youth, it was proof that digital technology could serve justice instead of corruption. And to the diaspora scattered across Europe and America, it was an invitation to come home, not physically but spiritually. Messages flooded social media. Finally, we can build without middlemen. For the first time, my money will not be stolen. Burkina Faso is showing us what sovereignty looks like. Foreign observers, however, reacted differently. Some Western outlets dismissed it as populist, others called it crowdfunding nationalism. But inside Africa, people saw something else, a social contract reborn. Traoré's words carried both humility and defiance. No one will come to build our country for us. It begins with us. Those 10 words became the moral spine of Faso Mbo. They turned the idea of government upside down from a distant authority to a shared responsibility. In Ouahigouya, traders pooled small coins to pave their local road. In Bobo Dioulasso, students collected school materials for rural classes. And across the Sahel, volunteers built water points and clinics, sending photos under one hashtag, Faso Mbo. For the first time in decades, the people didn't wait for politicians. They acted. And when a journalist asked Traoré how far this project would go, he replied with a calm certainty, as far as our courage allows. It was not just a sentence, it was a challenge to the entire continent. Because in a world where nations borrow billions just to build a bridge, here was a country proving that unity itself could be a form of wealth. The revolution of Faso Mbo wasn't built on gold, oil, or foreign loans. It was built on trust, the rarest currency in African politics. And as the applause faded, everyone knew something irreversible had begun. Burkina Faso was no longer waiting for help. It had started helping itself. The room grew still again as Ibrahim Traoré approached his final point. His eyes narrowed, his tone sharpened. He wasn't talking about thieves this time, but about something even more dangerous. They have used communication to destroy Africa since the days of slavery, he said. And the worst part is, we have been paying for it. That single sentence cracked like thunder across the chamber, because what came next felt like a confession of a nation awakening from a long hypnosis. During a 2024 budget review, Traoré explained his team discovered something extraordinarily grave. Hidden inside the budgets of ministries and state institutions were secret lines of spending recurring payments to foreign media outlets like Jeune, Afrique, Monde, and others. These weren't advertising contracts. They were subscriptions disguised as loyalty. Every year, millions of CFA francs quietly flowed from Burkina Faso taxpayers into the pockets of journalists who then turned around and painted the country as corrupt, unstable, or militarized. Can you imagine, he asked. The victim financing the weapon that kills her image. Gasps filled the hall. Some officials lowered their eyes. Others clenched their fists. Then he went further. He revealed that one of the state-owned enterprises, La Lonabe, the National Lottery, had actually become a shareholder in Jeune Afrique, a magazine that had spent years ridiculing the Burkina Faso revolution. The crowd erupted. "We will not continue to fund those who destroy us," Traore declared. "We are withdrawing immediately. Even if they never repay us, not 1 franc more will leave our treasury." Those words became the climax of the speech, a declaration of information sovereignty. For decades, African governments had unknowingly nourished a media ecosystem built to shame them. European outlets would take African money, twist African stories, and sell them back to the world as news. Traore had not only exposed the system, he cut the cord. Within hours, radio stations across Ouagadougou replayed the segment. Social media exploded with pride. "Burkina Faso has declared independence again," wrote one listener. "Not from France, from propaganda." At universities, communication students studied the speech line by line. Professors called it a turning point in African media history. Even civil servants began asking questions about their own departments. How much of our budget goes abroad? But not everyone was pleased. In Paris, editors at Jeune Afrique published a defensive article accusing Traoré of attacking press freedom. Others in the French establishment warned that African populism was threatening the media landscape. Yet to ordinary Africans, those arguments fell flat. For them, the speech wasn't censorship, it was justice. Because for the first time, someone had dared to say aloud what millions already knew, that words, when financed by empire, are more dangerous than bullets. And so Burkina Faso began what Traoré called la reconquête de la communication, the reconquest of its narrative. From that moment on, every journalist, every communicator faced a choice. You cannot be neutral. You are either for the homeland or against it. Whether one agreed or not, the message was unmistakable. A small, landlocked nation had just fired the loudest shot yet in Africa's war for dignity, and it didn't come from a gun. It came from a microphone. When Ibrahim Traoré's speech reached the international press, it didn't land quietly. It tore through the echo chambers of Western media like a spark in dry grass. At first, most global outlets ignored it. CNN didn't cover it. Reuters gave it 3 sentences. Le Monde dismissed it as un discours populiste. But independent journalists, the kind who still listen to the tremors beneath history, saw something else the moment when Africa stopped whispering and began defining itself. In Washington, a retired U.S. diplomat called it the most important African address since Kwame Nkrumah's 1963 speech at the United Nations. Why? Because it exposed what few in the West dare to admit, that control over Africa's story has always been more valuable than control over its gold. For decades, the Western media complex has functioned like an invisible empire, framing, filtering, and monetizing Africa's pain. Whenever a coup happened, it was instability. Whenever an African leader rejected IMF policies, it was authoritarianism. And whenever Africa stood tall, it was nationalism gone wrong. The same pattern, the same language crafted to keep Western audiences comfortable and African voices secondary. Traoré shattered that. He didn't beg for sympathy nor demand praise. He simply cut the cord, exposing how even public African money had been quietly sustaining that narrative. At universities across the U.S., from Howard to Georgetown, students of African studies began sharing clips of the speech. "He's not against journalism," one professor said. "He's against colonial journalism, and there's a difference." In Africa, the reaction was electric. Mali, Niger, and Guinea echoed his stance, announcing reviews of their own communication budgets. Ghanaian commentators debated whether similar funding channels existed in Accra. Nigeria's independent bloggers celebrated Traoré as Africa's media liberator. But in Europe, the fear was palpable. French editors privately warned advertisers that Africa is becoming unmanageable. Think tanks in Brussels described Burkina Faso as a case study in information defiance. Even the Vatican quietly but symbolically praised the moral clarity of a leader who dared to confront deceit with dignity. Meanwhile, in the United States, something deeper stirred among older Americans who remembered Watergate, the Pentagon Papers, and the long fight for truthful journalism. Many saw in Traoré's words a reflection of their own disillusionment, the sense that truth has become a product, not a principle. Commentators on independent U.S. podcasts drew a striking comparison. What Traore is doing for Africa, once said, is what Americans wish someone would do here: dismantle the media monopoly that decides what truth is allowed to exist. And so for the first time in decades, the global conversation about Africa shifted. No longer was it about aid, terrorism, or resources. It was about narrative sovereignty, the right of a people to tell their own story free from filters, foreign shareholders, and self-serving headlines. When asked whether his stance might isolate Burkina Faso, Traoré smiled and replied, "If truth isolates you, then maybe it's the world that's lost its way." That line traveled across continents, printed on posters, quoted in blogs, repeated on talk shows. And in that moment, the world finally began to understand Africa's war for independence was never over. It had simply changed battlefields from the minefields of gold to the headlines of truth. History has a strange way of repeating itself. In the old days, nations were conquered by armies. Today, they are conquered by narratives. What Ibrahim Traoré reminded the world is that the most dangerous weapon of the 21st century isn't a drone or a missile, it's the microphone. The voice that shapes what people believe, what they fear, and what they fight for. When he stood before his people in that October morning of 2025, he wasn't just addressing Burkina Faso. He was addressing an entire generation of Africans who have grown weary of being misunderstood, misquoted, and misrepresented. He was speaking to every farmer whose struggle was called poverty, every soldier whose sacrifice was labeled authoritarian, every nation whose sovereignty was rewritten as chaos. And in that silence between his sentences, something shifted. Burkina Faso, a small, landlocked nation often dismissed as irrelevant, became the moral compass of a continent. It reminded the world that integrity still matters, that truth, when spoken by the brave, can echo louder than bombs. But here lies the warning, one that echoes far beyond Africa. When truth becomes a threat, freedom is already in danger. When journalism becomes a weapon, democracy becomes a disguise. That's why Traoré's speech matters not just to Africa, but to America too. Because whether in Ouagadougou or Washington, the question remains the same: who controls the story? Who decides what the world should believe? And what happens when those who seek truth are labeled as enemies? As you finish watching this, remember, this isn't about politics. It's about the last battlefield left, the truth itself. Burkina Faso may not have the biggest army or the richest treasury, but today it has something far more powerful: a leader unafraid to say no, a people unafraid to wake up, and a story the world can no longer ignore. So I ask you, do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's fight for truth is a fight worth standing behind? Do you think that Africa's media independence could inspire a new wave of honesty even here in the West? If your answer is yes, then stand with us. Please share this message if you believe that truth is the real revolution. And subscribe if you believe that voices like Ibrahim Traoré's deserve to be heard before they are silenced. Because this time Africa is not begging to be understood, it's demanding to be heard.